Beneath the surface of a dead world, a fossil waited. For 3.5 billion years, it rested in silence, cradled within the iron veins of an ancient delta. It did not move, nor speak, nor glow. And yet it held the memory of a spark, a moment when carbon, water, and chance conspired to produce something that struggled against entropy. Not just chemical order, but intention. Energy bent toward replication. Complexity that danced at the edge of sentience. That fossil, etched in rings of vivianite and greigite, was not merely the residue of life, it was a message, and like all messages, it awaited a reader. On Earth, another world once warm, the reader finally arrived. A machine forged from starlight and silicon, programmed by descendants of that same impulse to resist decay, to know. It reached out with an articulated arm, brushed Martian dust from the stone, and drilled into memory itself. At that precise intersection of matter and meaning, the cosmos blinked. The rover did not understand what it had touched, but the humans did, and they were afraid. They feared not because the fossil proved life once existed beyond Earth, but because of what it implied about the structure of reality itself. For if life had emerged on Mars independently under a separate sky, through alien rivers with different minerals guiding its birth, then life was no miracle. It was mathematics. It was inevitable, which meant so was death. The prevailing model had always been a comforting one, that life was rare, that Earth was a statistical fluke, a jewel of accident adrift in chaos. This gave humanity meaning, weight, and permission to believe in its own exceptionality. It also implied that extinction was avoidable because we had already passed the improbability barrier. We had made it. But if life arises easily, if chemical inevitability sculpts biology, wherever warmth and time coalesce, then perhaps the barrier lies elsewhere. Not in the beginning, but in the middle, or worse, the end. What if intelligence was not a culmination, but an error? What if consciousness, that recursive fire, was not the universe awakening, but overheating? Science until now had looked outward with a confidence inherited from Copernicus and Darwin. A slow progression from superstition to enlightenment, from geocentrism to cosmic humility, from divine creation to chemical self-assembly. With telescopes and particle colliders, we mapped the sky and split the atom, always believing that knowledge would insulate us, but every answer pulled us deeper into uncertainty, dark matter, quantum indeterminacy. The silence of the stars, and now a Martian fossil, not imagined, not ambiguous, but textured, ringed, chemical in a way that only biology could explain. Raman spectroscopy confirmed the phosphate structures. X-ray fluorescence revealed the iron sulfides in tight concentric halos, and embedded in the mineral matrix, organic molecules arranged in suggestive patterns too organized for geology, too stable for random decay. The conclusion whispered itself, hesitant, unprovable, yet insistent. This had once been alive, and it had died. The implications unspooled with terrifying elegance. If abiogenesis, life from non-life, occurred both on Earth and Mars, then its probability was not infinitesimal. It was near unity under the right conditions, but intelligent life, spacefaring, star-watching, matter-rearranging life, that had arisen only once and had not yet survived itself. In all the silence of the galaxy, this was the echo. No alien radio signals, no Dyson spheres, no megastructures eclipsing suns, just a whisper beneath Martian dust. Perhaps the great filter was not behind us, but ahead. Perhaps evolution was not a ladder, but a cul-de-sac. Life emerges, life learns, life expands, and then inevitably life erases itself. The paradox burned. If life was common, why was the universe so quiet? Fermi's question sharpened like a blade. The discovery on Mars was not a solution, but a deepening of the riddle. It forced the equation to balance differently. If the origin of life was trivial, then its continuation must be impossible. Somewhere between cell and civilization, a wall must rise, unseen, undefinable. But absolute theories multiplied like panic. Some whispered of resource exhaustion, that civilizations consumed themselves before spreading. Others proposed technological saturation, a convergence so fast it imploded the social fabric. Still others invoked simulation theory, that only one consciousness need exist and all others were discarded scenarios. But none of these satisfied the fear rooted in the Martian rings, because this was not theory. It was a tomb. The fossil did not lie in an impact crater, but in a river delta, a place of flow, warmth, and sedimentary patience, a place where complexity could blossom and adapt. The structures resembled microbial colonies, those early Earth pioneers that fed on minerals and multiplied in concentric bursts. They had carved chemical shadows in the rock, artifacts of metabolism. But then the planet changed. Mars, smaller and geologically fragile, lost its molten heart. The dynamo failed. Its magnetic shield collapsed. Solar winds, unimpeded, tore away the atmosphere. The water sublimated, and with it, the last sanctuary for life. What remained was dust, rust, and silence. If Earth had cooled faster, would we be fossils too? Abiogenesis does not care for destiny. It does not aim. It stumbles forward through entropy, shaping vessels of carbon to momentarily hold energy before decay reclaims them. Intelligence was not guaranteed. It was an emergent glitch, and perhaps a fatal one. Some saw hope in the discovery. If life was common, then perhaps so was connection. But others saw the abyss. If Mars had life and lost it, then Earth was not an exception. It was a reprieve, one anomaly, one delay. Time became a predator in this new cosmology. Not the linear procession of progress, but a countdown. Evolution, acceleration, extinction. The James Webb Space Telescope, orbiting at the second Lagrange point, scanned distant atmospheres for biosignatures. It saw dimethyl sulfide, perhaps on a world orbiting a red dwarf 124 light-years away. But the signal remained faint, unconfirmed, just like the phosphine on Venus or the shadowed shapes in the clouds. Every potential whisper of life carried the same implication, that we are not alone in origin, only in outcome. Mars was now a mirror, not of who we are, but of who we might become. Its fossil was not merely a relic, it was a monument to inevitability, and yet the data continued to arrive: rings, spots, organic associations. Iron oxidations that mimic metabolism, nothing definitive, everything suggestive, a ghost of a biosphere, scrawled in mineral language, no eyes left to see, no mouths left to scream. Just one question now etched across the surface of a world. What if life is not the universe awakening, but the signal of its fever? First there was nothing. No space, no time, no laws. Not even the idea of a vacuum, for a vacuum presupposes emptiness, and this was emptier than that. It was the absence of absence. Then from this non-state came everything, a singularity not of size but of meaning, inflamed into being. Energy surged without cause. Space-time erupted from a point without coordinates. The universe blinked itself awake. This was the beginning, at least the one we understand. In the first fractions of a second, expansion outraced comprehension. In one unimaginably brief moment of inflation, the fabric of reality stretched beyond the size of galaxies. Particles emerged from raw energy, and from those particles, matter. Quarks formed hadrons. Hadrons formed protons and neutrons, and in the soft, cooling breath of those early minutes, hydrogen was born. From hydrogen came gravity's long game. Billions of years passed like breaths in a godless eternity. Gravity wove hydrogen into stars' great fusion engines that ignited and seeded complexity. In their hearts, atoms fused into heavier elements, exhaling carbon, oxygen, and iron into the void. Stars lived, stars died. Some collapsed into black holes, others exploded into supernova, flinging their enriched entrails into the night. It was not chaos, it was choreography. Galaxies spiraled from filaments of dark matter structures shaped by something unseen but undeniable. Gravity again spun them into disks and clusters, orchestrating gas and dust into order, into rhythm. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, was one such spiral, its arms cradling hundreds of billions of stars. One of these, a yellow G-type star, ignited 4.5 billion years ago, gathering 8 major planets around it like a slow, planetary waltz. Third from that star, a small blue world spun quietly. Earth at first was inhospitable, molten, cratered, bombarded by asteroids, and yet within 500 million years, something happened. Somewhere in the oceans of this nascent planet, chemistry became biology. Molecules combined, folded, self-replicated. Lipid membranes formed to protect fragile systems. RNA encoded rudimentary instructions. Catalysts evolved. Information began to persist. This transition from non-life to life is known as abiogenesis. And it is the great cornerstone of the scientific worldview. Abiogenesis does not invoke miracles. It invokes chemistry. Given the right conditions, liquid water, stable temperatures, a rich soup of carbon-based molecules, life is not a matter of if, but when. On Earth it appeared early, perhaps too early. Fossil evidence suggests life was present as soon as the planet had cooled enough to sustain liquid water. In less than a few 100 million years, microbes were metabolizing, dividing, evolving. Darwin's great gift was the mechanism of that evolution. Through variation and selection, life adapted. Mistakes became adaptations. Adaptations became complexity. Over billions of years, single-celled organisms gave rise to multicellular life, to nervous systems, to cognition. Through countless branching paths, one lineage developed a frontal cortex capable of memory, language, abstraction. Homo sapiens looked to the stars and wondered, and the stars, in turn, offered answers. The Hubble Space Telescope measured the expansion of the universe. The cosmic microwave background, a faint whisper of the first light, confirmed the Big Bang model. The James Webb Space Telescope extended our gaze even deeper, capturing the earliest galaxies, glimmering like embers through time. With these instruments, science constructed a narrative, a cold, expanding cosmos governed by fundamental forces, punctuated by stars, and capable, perhaps inevitably, of birthing observers. We called this the Standard Model. It was elegant, it was predictive, it was, for the most part, sufficient. It explained the curvature of space-time. It accounted for nucleosynthesis and planetary accretion. It traced the formation of galaxies and the spectral signatures of stars. It mapped the evolutionary tree from microbes to mammals, and it held within it a quiet optimism that intelligence, once emerged, could understand its origins. But beneath this narrative, questions lingered. What triggered the Big Bang? What gave the laws of physics their form? Why do constants like the gravitational force or the charge of the electron possess precisely the values that allow atoms, chemistry, and life? These questions were often deemed philosophical outside the bounds of empirical science, and yet they tugged at the edges of the model, like threads waiting to unravel a larger tapestry. Still, most scientists remained within the model's luminous boundaries. It worked, it explained, it predicted, and so it was trusted. The Drake equation attempted to extend this trust into the realm of extraterrestrial life. By plugging in factors like the rate of star formation, the fraction of stars with planets, the number of Earth-like worlds, and the probability of life and intelligence, it provided a scaffold for expectation. Even conservative inputs yielded staggering numbers, thousands, millions, perhaps billions of civilizations in our galaxy alone. But there was a problem. We heard nothing. The radio waves of the cosmos, once thought to be filled with alien chatter, remained silent. No signals, no probes, no structures intercepting starlight. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence scanned for decades and found only void. The Fermi Paradox, named after physicist Enrico Fermi, sharpened into accusation. If the universe is so full of life, where is everyone? And yet the Standard Model held firm. Perhaps life was rare. Perhaps intelligence was self-destructive. Perhaps the distances were too great, or civilizations too short-lived to overlap. These were acceptable answers, not because they satisfied, but because they preserved the narrative. In this worldview, Earth was still unique, but not because it had life, rather because it had us, observers capable of asking, measuring, understanding. The anthropic principle suggested that our very act of questioning necessitated a universe that permitted our existence. This seemed circular, but it had explanatory power. We lived in a universe that could make us, Therefore, the universe looked as it did. It was a cosmology of coincidence, wrapped in mathematics. There were other models, of course. Quantum fluctuations birthing multiverses, inflationary fields sculpting pocket realities, cyclical universes rebounding through endless bangs and collapses. But these were speculative, mathematical frontiers awaiting evidence. Meanwhile, the standard cosmological narrative remained unchallenged in textbooks and observatories. From nothing came something. From chaos came stars, from stardust came life, and from life came mind. But what if this story, as precise and luminous as it appears, was missing something fundamental? What if the silence is not an absence, but a warning? What if the models we trust are not wrong, but incomplete not because of what they say, but because of what they cannot imagine? And if life is not a miracle, but a mechanism, then what exactly does that make us? The silence came first. Not the silence of space, which is expected in absence of air, of vibration, of sound, but a deeper, more unsettling quiet, the absence of signal. For all our instruments, all our algorithms tuned to pass the stars, nothing artificial ever echoed back. Not a pulse, not a pattern, not a whisper shaped by intelligence. This was the first hairline crack in the mirror of the cosmos. The Drake equation said we should not be alone. The numbers conservative, rigorous predicted thousands of communicative civilizations in our galaxy. And yet, the sky remained a cathedral of silence. No engineered emissions. No interstellar architecture, no signs of those who came before or those who might yet remain. The paradox of Enrico Fermi did not fade with time, it deepened, but that silence was only the beginning. In 1996, a Martian meteorite ALH 84001 was found in Antarctica. Inside, scientists identified structures resembling fossilized microbes. It was not conclusive, of course. Other geologists proposed abiotic processes that could mimic such formations. But the shape lingered, etched in public memory, in scientific unease, a microbe-shaped question mark from another world. Then, in 2020, astronomers detected phosphine in the atmosphere of Venus, a molecule associated with microbial life. It was found in concentrations difficult to explain through known chemical processes. The excitement was immediate. Phosphine on Venus, life in the clouds, but confirmation never came. Follow-up studies produced contradictory results. Other explanations, more inert, were proposed. And again, the mystery dissolved back into uncertainty. Later, the James Webb Space Telescope peered into the spectrum of a distant exoplanet orbiting a red dwarf star. In its atmosphere, a signature dimethyl sulfide, a compound on Earth linked to microbial metabolism in the oceans. The signal was faint, tentative. Again, excitement. Again, silence. Anomalies arose, shimmered with possibility, and receded. This pattern became familiar, a rhythm of almosts, of discoveries balanced on the edge between the profound and the explainable. Each time, science leaned toward caution, and rightly so. Extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence. But the anomalies accumulated like whispers in a quiet room, none conclusive, all suggestive. Then came perseverance. The rover landed in Jezero Crater, a dried Martian lakebed chosen for its ancient hydrological past. Scientists hoped for clay minerals, sedimentary layering traces of water's long-departed breath. What they found was more. In a region called the Bright Angel, the rover encountered concentric rings embedded in iron-rich rock. They were dubbed poppy seeds and leopard spots. Intriguing, but not yet extraordinary, until spectroscopy revealed their composition. The rings were composed of iron phosphates Vivian, surrounding cores of graphite, and iron sulfide. And within those rings, organic molecules, not life, but the molecular vocabulary of life. The chemical story implied a process: oxidation of organic carbon, reduction of iron, formation of mineral halos. A metabolic signature. On Earth, this is how certain microbes feed. The formation was uncannily familiar, not random, not chaotic, but organized, structured, persistent. Alternative explanations were proposed. Perhaps high heat or acidity, perhaps a geochemical fluke, but the surrounding geology showed no evidence of such conditions. No volcanic sulfur, No signs of intense temperature. The patterns remained, their biological shape unshaken. And something deeper stirred. This was not the only enigma lurking in plain sight. In the genetic archives of Earth's life, another whisper echoed, a curious acceleration. For nearly 3 billion years, life remained microbial. Then, in a geological blink, complexity exploded. Multicellular life, nervous systems, cognition. The Cambrian burst forth with eyes, claws, and brains, as though life had waited for some hidden signal. Biologists explain this with environmental triggers, rising oxygen levels, evolutionary arms races, ecological niches, but the sharpness of the transition persisted. It was not impossible, but it was sharp. Unexpectedly so. Likewise, the genetic code itself, the universal language of all terrestrial life, remained curiously stable. The code did not drift, it was frozen. As though once established, it resisted change with unnatural force. No known evolutionary pressure explained such rigidity. It was as if the code was not merely selected but installed. Some speculated that this implied a single origin, that life had arisen once and all forms inherited the same molecular syntax. But even so, why no drift? Why no deviation across billions of years? If random mutations shaped the tree of life, why did its roots hold so tightly? The anomalies continued. In astrophysics, galaxies rotated in defiance of visible mass. Dark matter was invoked, a placeholder for the unseen. Entire clusters moved in ways that contradicted gravitational models. Dark energy was added to balance the books. The universe, it seemed, was held together by things we could not observe, could not measure, could not explain. Cosmologists adjusted the equations. The models still worked, but the map was now filled with invisible ink. Even the cosmic microwave background, the ancient light of the universe, held puzzles. Cold spots too large. Asymmetries where symmetry was expected. The standard model accounted for most of it, but not all. Tiny discrepancies lingered like fingerprints on a lens. The closer we looked, the more cracks emerged. Abiogenesis, once the triumphant bridge from chemistry to biology, remained a theory with no empirical anchor. Despite decades of research, no experiment had produced a self-replicating system from lifeless molecules. Simulations hinted, models proposed, but in the lab, life refused to reappear. It was not impossible. It was merely elusive, but the elusiveness itself became suspect. Why, in a universe that seems to allow life, does its origin remain so stubbornly veiled? Why do we find chemical hints on other worlds, but never the living thing? Why does life, once emerged, become so suddenly complex and so fragile? Why do we detect biosignatures that vanish under scrutiny? What if the universe is not silent, but filtered? The term Great Filter arose to describe this possibility, that somewhere between the formation of habitable planets and the emergence of star-faring civilizations, there exists a wall. An obstacle so formidable that almost no species ever passes. Perhaps abiogenesis is that wall, perhaps intelligence, perhaps self-destruction, but the more evidence suggested life was not rare, the less likely the early filters became. If life existed on Mars or Venus or exoplanets, then the bottleneck must come later, after cognition, after tools, after culture, just before escape velocity, just before survival, and still, the fossils of Earth hinted at a deeper story. In 1972, a researcher studying stromatolites, layered microbial mats found in ancient rocks, noticed a strange regularity. The patterns were too periodic, too consistent. He proposed that they might encode information. Not genetic, not biological, but geometric, a mathematical signature hidden in the growth of ancient colonies. The idea was dismissed. Life, after all, was not intelligent then. But what if intelligence does not mean language? What if information can precede awareness? What if meaning does not require a mind? The universe is filled with signals, some made by chance, some by process, some perhaps by purpose. The challenge is not in detection, but in interpretation. And perhaps in humility. For every mystery dismissed too quickly, every anomaly explained away, may conceal not just data but direction, a pointing finger unnoticed, a whisper unheard, a pattern unrecognized. So the question rises, persistent, unsilenceable. What if the anomalies are not failures of observation, but invitations to reimagine everything? It was not supposed to be there. In the data stream returning from the James Webb Space Telescope, a planetary atmosphere shimmered with a pattern that did not fit, a tight, repetitive structure in the infrared spectrum, nested within the broad strokes of water vapor and carbon dioxide. The molecule responsible was dimethyl sulfide, a compound known on Earth to be produced almost exclusively by life. Not complex life, not cities, not civilizations, but the breath of microbial metabolism, exhaled by plankton and sulfur-eating bacteria. The exoplanet was designated LHS 475b, orbiting a red dwarf star 124 light-years away, too close to its star for comfort, locked in synchronous rotation, one face forever scorched, the other sunk in endless twilight. But in the sliver between day and night, the Terminator Zone models predicted a ribbon of temperate possibility. It was there the signature originated. The detection was not absolute. It hovered just above the noise threshold, like a voice nearly drowned in wind. But it repeated. With each orbital pass, the molecule sang the same spectral song, the same absorption, the same shape, consistent, ordered, and maddeningly out of place. There are no known abiotic processes that produce dimethyl sulfide in such concentrations. Not on Earth, not in theory. It does not arise from volcanoes. It does not emerge from photochemistry. It is a compound of choice chosen, shaped, and released by living systems for specific biochemical reasons. Still, caution tempered excitement. Science had learned the pain of premature celebration. Phosphine on Venus, methane on Mars, the cold fossil in ALH 84001, all had walked the tightrope between discovery and disappointment. This one might be no different, and yet there was something else. Alongside the dimethyl sulfide, another anomaly lurked. Not a molecule, but a pattern subtle, encoded in the temperature fluctuations of the exoplanet's atmosphere. Thermal maps created from infrared light showed a regularity, a periodicity that defied meteorology. Heat pulses circling the Terminator Zone in harmonic resonance, as though the planet itself were breathing. The rhythm was too precise, a sinusoidal oscillation in temperature, repeating every 72 hours, synchronized with the planet's orbit, but lagging its expected thermal inertia. The atmosphere was not simply reacting to starlight, it was responding to something else. Something internal. No natural mechanism could produce such harmonics without some form of regulation. No winds or tides could maintain that precise of a signal over months. It was as if the air itself was part of a machine. A thermodynamic oscillator embedded in planetary scale. At first, the hypothesis was dismissed as instrument error, ghost signals, artifacts of the processing pipeline. But as data accumulated, confidence grew. Other telescopes, Spitzer, TESS, even the old Hubble's archives were cross-referenced. The signal persisted, the pattern held, a planet was pulsing, and it was doing so in concert with a molecule that should not exist. The implications were staggering. Some whispered the unthinkable, that the planet was not merely inhabited, but altered, not terraformed in the brute sense of atmosphere conversion, but tuned, calibrated, adjusted, a system modulated by design. Others urged restraint, perhaps an exotic chemical cycle unknown to Earth's catalogue, perhaps a rare resonance of tidal locking and atmospheric density, but each explanation strained against probability. And the rhythm remained. Then came the second planet. In another system, orbiting a G-type star similar to the Sun, an older planet HD 110,067c revealed a similar thermal signature, not identical, but analogous. A different oscillation, longer period, lower amplitude, but with the same eerie precision, again near the Terminator Zone, again in a region of predicted stability. Its atmosphere, too, contained something strange. Not dimethyl sulfide this time, but a family of chlorinated hydrocarbons, compounds that on Earth rarely appear without industrial synthesis. The concentrations were low, buried in the atmospheric noise. But they clustered around a spectral band that suggested non-randomness. This was harder to dismiss. 2 planets, 2 rhythms, 2 chemical markers associated with life or industry, separated by hundreds of light years. Sharing no common star, no known formation history, yet both singing similar songs in the dark. The term that emerged was harmonic biosignature, not a compound, not a structure, a pattern, a planetary breath. What kind of system could imprint such a thing on a world? On Earth, oscillatory systems exist in all scales: circadian rhythms, ecological cycles, climate feedbacks, but they emerge from billions of individual processes. No single pattern governs all. No planetary beat exists. But what if it could? What if an ancient civilization, long vanished, had found a way to regulate their planets as one might regulate a heart? Not to control, but to sustain, to engineer stability through harmonic resonance, to encode longevity into atmosphere itself. Or worse, what if the pattern was not biological, but communicative, a message written in thermodynamics? A low-frequency transmission meant not for ears, but for instruments, a pulse that could travel across space, unnoticed until now. No modulation, no encryption, just a rhythm, a breath, a heartbeat. The comparison was not lost on the scientists. A heartbeat is a signal of life, but also a warning of fragility. It can stop. The anomalies forced a re-examination of assumptions. Life had always been expected to scream radio waves, lasers, beacons. But what if advanced life whispered? What if it encoded its presence not in machines, but in planets, in chemistry, in rhythms? A civilization that wished to endure might hide within its own biosphere. A civilization that wished to be found might modulate its climate, not out of arrogance, but as a trace, a fossil of intention. The James Webb Space Telescope continued its work. More planets were surveyed. Most showed nothing, randomness, chaos, but just a few began to show hints, not full patterns, but shadows of periodicity, glimpses of coherence within disorder, enough to suspect, not enough to claim. And then Earth was examined, as control, as baseline. Earth too showed atmospheric rhythms, diurnal cycles, seasonal oscillations, but they were messier. No harmonic precision, no planetary pulse. Until someone ran the data through a different filter, not one designed for climate, one designed for encryption. They looked not for temperature, but for modulation, not for chemical abundance, but for information density. And in the atmospheric data, faint and long forgotten, they found the echo of a structure that matched the harmonic signature of HD 110,067C. Not perfectly, but enough, and in that moment the question inverted. What if Earth was not the origin? What if we were not the first? What if the pattern did not signal life now but life before? Not aliens among us, but ancestors who left behind rhythms instead of ruins. What kind of civilization encodes its memory in weather? And more terrifyingly, what are we failing to hear in our own planetary breath? The problem was not that life existed elsewhere. The problem was that it may have always existed before us, around us, within us, hidden not in darkness but in pattern, in cycles, in code. The hypothesis emerged slowly, at first whispered in quiet conferences, buried in speculative footnotes, only later uttered aloud, that life may not begin, but persist, that its origin is not spontaneous, but transplanted. That Earth was not the cradle, but the receiver. It was called panspermia, though that word felt too sterile, too ancient for what it now implied. The concept had long existed at the edge of scientific respectability, that microscopic life, propelled by impact ejector, could seed neighboring worlds. That Mars could have given life to Earth, or vice versa, via rocks thrown through space by violent collisions. But this was not about rocks, this was about design. Directed panspermia, once relegated to the domain of science fiction, resurfaced with uncomfortable clarity. The idea that life was not only dispersed but intentionally delivered, that somewhere, sometime, someone or something chose to ignite the chain reaction we call biology. It was not a theological claim. There was no need for deities. The proposers of this hypothesis did not invoke gods but engineers, ancient biocrafters, cosmic gardeners, entities so far removed from us temporally, biologically, and cognitively that they no longer resembled civilizations but processes. And what they planted was not just cells, it was potential. Self-replicating systems optimized not merely to survive, but to evolve, to test, to adapt across environments, across stars, across epochs. Life not as accident, but as algorithm executed on planetary scales, in biological substrates. Earth, in this view, was not special. It was a node, a fertile data point in a long experiment. The evidence was circumstantial. But it compounded. The rapid appearance of life on Earth, occurring almost immediately after conditions allowed it, suggested pre-encoded readiness. The stability of the genetic code, frozen for billions of years across all species, hinted at design constraints rather than evolutionary drift. And the harmonic anomalies discovered in distant exoplanet atmospheres too regular to be weather, too subtle to be civilization were not broadcasts, but beacons, environmental pings, proofs of concept, rhythmic fingerprints left by biospheres already shaped, perhaps long since extinguished, still echoing the parameters of their creators. If life were indeed seeded, the next question followed with inexorable gravity. Why? Not merely survival. No species, however advanced, survives across galactic timescales without change. Not memory, either organic systems decay. Stars die, planets shift, then what was the point? Some suggested a kind of informational persistence. That life was a compression algorithm for knowledge, evolution as an engine for discovery, tuned to generate novelty, consciousness, self-awareness, qualities capable of reflecting the structure of the universe itself. Others proposed a darker thought, that life was not the goal but a test, that the experiment was not whether life could emerge, but whether it could endure itself. Each seeded world, a trial. Each intelligent species, a variable. Some advanced, some collapsed, all were observed, perhaps not in real time, but through the residue they left: radiation patterns, biosignatures, atmospheric scars, not surveillance but analysis. What then were the criteria for success? Was the emergence of intelligence enough, or was it coordination, sustainability, empathy? Was the test passively administered or actively influenced? And the most unsettling question of all, had any passed? There was no data, no monuments, no messages from beyond, just the silence, unless the silence was the message, a universal constant, a warning. Perhaps the designers, if they existed, knew that interference corrupted outcome. That species must be left alone to determine their own trajectory, that to no one is being tested is to fail the test, or perhaps there were no designers left, perhaps the process had automated. Once begun, it no longer needed custodians. The code was self-perpetuating, traveling on light, dust, or time. Worlds formed, life bloomed, and patterns repeated long after their authors had vanished. This opened a further possibility, that life was not the project of minds, but of the universe itself. Not intentional, but emergent, that the cosmos wants to observe itself, and so it generates vessels fragile, temporary, endlessly curious us. But then why the constraints? Why entropy? Why cosmic radiation, extinction events, solar instability? Why a universe so hostile to its own reflections, unless the hostility is the filter, unless consciousness is meant to be rare, and those few species who endure their adolescence, who balance technology with restraint, insight with humility, are the ones who transcend. Not through travel, not through conquest, but through recognition. The moment they perceive the pattern, the rhythm, the breath behind the randomness, and then, perhaps, they hear the signal, the one that was never broadcast, but embedded. In molecules, in mitochondria, in magnetospheres and microbial fossils, a signal that says you are not alone, you never were, but you may be the last, so the question no longer concerns whether life exists elsewhere, but whether the experiment is still running, and if so, who or what is watching the outcome. They left no monuments, no towers reaching toward unknown suns, no satellites trapped in orbit, silently decaying, no great cities buried beneath strata of dust and time, Instead, they left echoes, statistical ghosts, subtle improbabilities stitched into the fabric of what remained. If an ancient civilization once existed before us, beside us, or within the epochs we thought we knew, it did not announce itself through grandeur. It whispered. And those whispers still haunt the margins of our datasets, in places where chance alone no longer suffices. One of the whispers comes from deep beneath Earth's oceans. In the North Pacific, mapped by sonar and forgotten submarines, lies an anomalous formation known as the benthic array, not an official name. Merely what the few who studied it began to call it. The array spans several kilometers along the seafloor, an arrangement of basalt pillars rising at regular intervals, evenly spaced far too evenly for volcanic extrusion. Their geometric alignment matches no known tectonic pattern. There is no record of tectonic uplift or sedimentary erosion that could produce such precision. When radiometric dating was attempted, the age was older than expected. Far older than the seafloor itself, an impossibility, dismissed as contamination. The official record makes no mention of the array, but in an obscure naval archive, someone had written a question in the margin of the survey. What if it was not built above the crust but before it? Another whisper lingers in the genomes of extremophiles, organisms that thrive in environments too hostile for most life: boiling acid, crushing pressure, ionizing radiation. Within their DNA, researchers have identified sequences with no known evolutionary lineage, so-called orphan genes. These genes have no ancestors, no precursors, no mutations leading to their appearance. They exist fully formed, perfectly functional, like linguistic insertions in an alien dialect. Most are dismissed as anomalies. Mutation artifacts, noise, but there are patterns in their arrangement, symmetries, redundancies, even hints of mathematical structure. One researcher claimed that a fragment of an orphan gene encoded a prime number sequence in amino acid intervals. She called it protein poetry. Her paper was rejected. She disappeared from the field. Some speculate the genes are remnants of ancient bioengineering tools designed not for survival, but for recovery. Systems embedded in early life to reboot complexity after catastrophic collapse. A biological insurance policy, not evidence of civilization perhaps, but of design. And then there is the scar on Mars. Not Olympus Mons or Valles Marineris, but a region less known, the Elysium Planitia, flat, lifeless, unremarkable, until Perseverance imaged a plain where the soil was oddly vitrified, fused into glass, as though by sudden, immense heat. No nearby volcano, no asteroid crater, no known impact signature, just a sheet of fused minerals stretching kilometers wide, with strange angular breaks, polygonal, but too irregular for crystalline cooling. Some believed it the result of a natural lightning storm on an immense scale, others a glacial anomaly, but glass records memory. Microscopic analysis of the region revealed something unexpected. Embedded within the glass were tiny filaments of carbon, coiled in helices. Not DNA, not even organic, but structures eerily reminiscent of nanotubes, cylindrical molecules once dreamed of as the backbone of nanotechnology. Their arrangement was not random. They formed nested spirals. No geological process is known to produce carbon filaments in spiral arrays within vitrified plains. The sample was quietly reclassified. In a footnote, a postdoc asked what melts rock without leaving a crater and encodes order in carbon. The answers did not come, but the questions remained. Elsewhere, in the long dark of Saturn's moon Iapetus, the Cassini probe captured images of a ridge that bisects the moon like a planetary scar. A mountain range rising 20 kilometers high, stretching along the equator with unnatural symmetry. Geologists called it a mystery of internal stresses, an accident of tidal forces, but no other moon has such a feature. From orbit, the ridge appears like a seam, as though the moon had been constructed, or at least altered, as if it had once been opened. In 2007, a private research team analyzed the albedo contrast on Iapetus, the moon's stark division between light and dark hemispheres. They proposed that the darkness was not deposited, but eroded, that something had once covered the entire surface and had since receded or been removed, leaving one half exposed. Their simulations showed an ancient spherical shell, now only half remembered by the moon itself. No mechanism for such erosion exists, no evidence remains, only the division and silence. Closer to home, in the patterns of human myth, a different kind of artifact endures. Stories across disconnected cultures on islands, in deserts, in mountaintops speak of those who came before. Beings of light, sky, or stone, not gods, not quite. Teachers, watchers, builders, they arrive, they instruct, they vanish. Floods follow, fires collapse. The stories are dismissed as archetypes. Cognitive pareidolia. Pattern recognition turned backward. But what if myth is not memory but residue, the echo of contact beyond comprehension? A linguistic scar left by something the human mind could not fully receive. Perhaps they came not to rule but to restart, not saviors, not colonists, just custodians of something older than narrative, older than belief, and if they came, they left nothing, nothing we could measure. But perhaps everything we are. The question then changes, not are we the first, but how many came before, and how many times did the sky reset? If the galaxy has memory, where is it stored? And more urgently, what did they fear so greatly that they chose to leave no trace? It coils in silence, 3 billion letters folded into every cell of your body. Letters that do not spell words, yet define blood, breath, thought. A script without ink, a language without tongue, and still it speaks. Deoxyribonucleic acid, a molecule of such improbable elegance that it stores, replicates, edits, and preserves the instructions to build a living world. From plankton to pine, from mushroom to man, the same 4 letters adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine interlock like ancient runes in endlessly recombinable patterns. A quaternary alphabet with near infinite expressive power. And no known alternative, there are not 2 versions of life, not competing codes, not divergent experiments, only this one, universal, stable, unchanged for over 3 billion years. Evolution drifts. Forms shift, ecosystems bloom and collapse, but the code does not. Why? This is the question molecular biology cannot answer. Mutation is common. Selection is ruthless. Why then has the very foundation of life's information remained immune to the chaos from which it supposedly arose? In theory, alternate genetic codes could exist. Codons, the 3-letter groupings of nucleotides, could be reassigned. There are, mathematically, thousands of viable ways to encode proteins, and yet every known life form on Earth uses the same system. Even viruses, even extremophiles, some argue this is a frozen accident, that once a particular code emerged, it became locked by evolutionary inertia, too costly to change without catastrophic collapse. But such reasoning avoids the deeper implication. The code works because it is already optimized. It is error-tolerant. It minimizes the damage of mutations. It encodes redundancy, self-correction, and efficiency in a way no random process could predict. Engineers recognize this. The genetic code resembles a checksum algorithm, a data integrity structure, a kind of biological parity logic, ensuring that even in the presence of damage, the message persists. It is not perfect, but it is robust, too robust. In 2013, a team of geneticists encoded a piece of digital data into synthetic DNA, a photograph, a short video, even a computer virus. The data was recovered flawlessly after thousands of replication cycles. The molecule did not care what was written. It preserved it. This is what makes DNA more than a molecule. It is a storage medium, an information substrate, a biological hard drive carrying a payload of instructions and potential. And yet no one knows where the file system begins. Within human DNA, less than 2% codes for proteins. The rest, over 98%, is often called non-coding. Once dismissed as junk, it is now recognized as regulatory, structural, and enigmatic. Repeats, switches, silencers, elements that orchestrate expression in ways still not understood. Among these regions lie sequences that do not behave like genes. They do not mutate in the same way. They do not express proteins. They persist. Some contain palindromic structures. Others echo mathematical constants, in spacing and frequency. The Fibonacci sequence emerges in regulatory motifs, golden ratios in promoter regions. Coincidence, pattern recognition gone awry, or are we reading fragments of something far older than we can comprehend? Some researchers have proposed that parts of the genome resemble code compression artifacts. Not evolved structures, but encoded compressions, as if a more complex message had been minimized, optimized, reduced for storage. What kind of message? None can say. But when analyzed as symbolic systems, some DNA sequences exhibit linguistic properties, Zipfian distributions, Shannon entropies, syntax-like clustering. A few dared to suggest that DNA might be readable. Not metaphorically, literally. If so, then every living cell is an archive, every species a memory structure, every replication a broadcast. What if DNA is not only a recipe for life, but a record of life? Not ours, theirs, the ones who came before. Not gods, not monsters, just predecessors. Imagine a civilization that does not build pyramids, but proteins, that writes not in stone or radio, but in ribosomes. That sends not ships but spores, that encodes its knowledge in life itself, not to be read with eyes but with enzymes, not spoken aloud but unfolded in metabolism. Such a civilization would not need to travel. Its message would grow, adapt, evolve, and one day, perhaps, wonder. We are accustomed to thinking of intelligence as something that creates, but what if intelligence survives by embedding, not cities but cells? Not monuments but mitochondria, not blueprints but biochemistry. The human genome contains sequences derived from ancient retroviruses, foreign code embedded in our own, once parasitic, now symbiotic. Some of these sequences regulate placental development. Without them, mammalian reproduction would not exist. Our birth requires ancient viral inheritance, so whose code do we still carry? And if DNA is a message, who was meant to receive it? Perhaps we are not the authors. Perhaps we are not even the readers. Perhaps we are the message itself. In that case, the question is no longer biological. It is philosophical, ontological. If life is memory encoded in matter, then whose memory are we made of? The constants did not have to be what they are. The gravitational force could have been stronger by a fraction. Stars would have collapsed before fusion began. The electromagnetic force could have been weaker. Atoms would have failed to bind. The ratio of the masses of the proton and electron, the strength of the strong nuclear force, the cosmological constant, each sits within a narrow, improbable range. Together they produce a universe that expands without tearing, condenses without collapsing, cools without extinguishing, a universe that permits life, not guarantees it, but allows the possibility. This has become known hesitantly as the fine-tuning problem, not because it demands belief, but because it defies expectation. The laws of physics are not arbitrary, but neither are they necessary. They could be otherwise, and yet they are not, they are precise. This has led to speculation, not from mystics, but from physicists, that perhaps this universe is not the only one. Perhaps there are others multiverses, each with its own set of rules, its own constants, its own geometry. Most would be sterile, lifeless, brief flickers in quantum foam, but a few, infinitesimally few, would be like this one, stable, structured, capable of stars, chemistry, memory. We find ourselves in such a universe not because it was made for us, but because we could not exist elsewhere. This is the anthropic principle. It explains nothing, but it frames the question, what if instead the fine-tuning is not statistical but intentional? This does not require a god, it requires a mind. Or rather, a process indistinguishable from intelligence. One hypothesis emerges, uncomfortably elegant, that the universe itself is an experiment, not metaphorically, literally, an engineered environment created to explore the emergence of complexity. A vast sandbox of energy and laws, tuned to see what structures might arise, not for amusement, not for creation's sake, but for observation. This is the essence of the experimental cosmology model. The idea that this universe is one of many, generated by an unknown external system, a laboratory of sorts in which the parameters of physics are dials, and time is a looped process of iteration. Stars form. Planets condense, life emerges or fails. The results are stored, analyzed, discarded, or replicated with variations. A cosmic natural selection, not of species, but of realities. It sounds grandiose, yet parts of modern physics already flirt with similar ideas. Black holes may contain disconnected spacetime regions. Quantum fluctuations may birth bubble universes. String theory describes a landscape of 10,500 possible vacuum states, each with its own laws. In this context, to ask whether the universe is designed becomes less mystical and more algorithmic. The question shifts from who made this to what process could generate such conditions repeatedly and observe their outcomes. Within this framework, life is not the goal. It is the measurement. Each intelligent observer adds a data point to the larger equation. Each civilization becomes part of the universe's attempt to understand itself. Not from within, but from above. Some propose simulation, that what we experience is not physical at all, but computational, that spacetime is discrete, quantized at the Planck scale, like pixels too small to see. That quantum indeterminacy is not randomness, but computational limitation, that the speed of light is a processing constraint, and that consciousness is not emergent, but monitored. In this view, the stars are not distant. They are rendered, the past is not remembered, it is cached, the future is not unwritten, it is uncalculated. We have not found the edges of this universe because the simulation does not draw what we do not observe. The silence of the cosmos is not a mystery, but a feature. The simulation does not simulate more than it must. This hypothesis, once confined to philosophy, now finds its way into peer-reviewed journals. Not because it is proven, but because no other explanation is less strange. Then there is panspermia, that life spreads across space not by chance, but by design, that planets like Earth are seeded intentionally not once, but repeatedly, that certain molecules are encoded with templates, ready to unfold into biology when conditions permit, the seeds of life hurled across interstellar distances, frozen in comets, shielded in rock, drifting in the cold for eons until gravity and temperature call them to awaken. This is not conjecture. Bacteria on Earth have survived the vacuum of space. Spores endure radiation, freezing, desiccation. Experiments on the International Space Station have proven it. Life can travel. Life can wait, so why not plant it? Some suggest the architects of panspermia are long gone, that life is their echo, that each biosphere is not an origin, but an extension, a growth node in a distributed network of biology. Perhaps DNA is not just memory, but interface, a standard protocol for interpreting environmental data, a codec for translating matter into experience. If so, the laws of physics are not constraints. They are a substrate, a platform, and we life are the application. The implications of this are staggering, not because they answer the question of purpose, but because they redefine it. If the universe is tuned for life, then life is not an accident. It is part of the system, not an afterthought, not a byproduct, but a function. And if life is the function, then perhaps consciousness is the output, a way for the universe to measure itself, to reflect. To remember, in quantum mechanics, there is the notion that particles do not assume definite states until measured, that reality is probability until observed. What if the universe itself does not exist fully until it is perceived? What if perception is not passive but participatory, not seeing what is there but calling it into being? Then intelligence is not the end of the story. It is the beginning, not the final product of evolution, but the first signal of cosmological awakening. In such a model, civilizations are not alone because the void is empty. They are alone because they are the eyes, not the mouths. Their role is not to be heard, but to see, to observe, to render reality into being. So the question becomes, are we the product of a universe or its observer, still learning how to look? The odds were never in our favor. To say life is improbable is to underestimate the scale of the abyss it climbed from. It is to mistake familiarity for likelihood, to confuse presence with ease. Life is not inevitable. It is an anomaly, a statistical insult to chaos. Begin at the beginning. The known universe contains more than 100 billion galaxies. Each galaxy holds hundreds of billions of stars. Around those stars orbit trillions of planets, and yet, as far as we can measure, only one planet breathes. This is not comforting. It is unnerving. The numbers were supposed to save us. The vastness of the cosmos was meant to dilute the improbability. With so many worlds, surely life must erupt again and again. And yet, the silence, the signal never comes. The sky remains mute, and Earth looks less like a typical outcome and more like an outlier. A deviation, a glitch. Take a moment to consider the layers of improbability stacked upon one another. First, the formation of a stable star, neither too massive nor too dim. Then, the presence of a rocky planet within the narrow band where water can remain liquid. Then, a magnetic field to deflect solar radiation, a large moon to stabilize axial tilt, a molten core to generate geothermal cycling, a collision history that delivers both organics and volatiles without sterilizing the surface. Each factor narrows the window, each condition filters the possibilities, but even this architecture is nothing compared to the birth of life itself. Abiogenesis, the transition from non-life to life, is a process we still cannot reproduce. Not in labs, not in simulations, not in theory. To build a single self-replicating molecule that can evolve, store information, and persist, this alone lies beyond our current reach. The odds of this happening by random molecular assembly have been calculated by some to be less than 1 in 1040,000. That number is meaningless to the human mind. It is a number larger than the number of atoms in the observable universe. It is a number that may as well be zero, and yet here we are. Some argue that probability becomes irrelevant in a universe this large, that with infinite time and space, even the most unlikely event becomes certainty. But the observable universe is not infinite. It is finite in both space and time, and within that limit, the formation of life appears not just rare, but inexplicable, unless randomness is not what it appears to be. Unless randomness is structure misunderstood. In mathematics, chaos often hides order. The digits of pi appear random, but they are generated by a deterministic process. The Mandelbrot set reveals infinite complexity, all derived from a simple equation. What looks like noise may be a signal we cannot yet decode. What we call chance may be choreography we are too early to recognize. There are hints. The distribution of prime numbers is irregular, but not lawless. The fine structure constant governing the strength of electromagnetic interaction sits at 1/137, a value that resonates across disciplines, from quantum electrodynamics to cosmology. Why, we do not know. But its precise value allows atoms to form and chemistry to function. A small deviation would dissolve matter as we know it. The cosmological constant is tuned to such an exactness that had it varied by 1 part in 10^120, the universe would have either collapsed or expanded too rapidly for structure to form. These are not metaphors. These are numbers, and numbers do not lie. The universe is tuned whether by design, by necessity, or by processes unknown, tuned to permit complexity, tuned to host observers. This is not evidence of a deity. It is evidence of constraint, of an underlying logic, of a frame beneath the picture. The improbability of life, when stacked upon the improbability of consciousness, becomes unbearable. Neurons arranged in networks, firing with such frequency and nuance that thought arises. A brain that can model the world, question itself, reflect on its own impermanence. There is no evolutionary pressure for the appreciation of beauty, no survival advantage in pondering infinity, and yet we do. We look at the stars and wonder. This capacity, this recursive awareness was not necessary for reproduction. It was not necessary for tools or language or survival, and yet it came, and with it came the unbearable weight of meaning. A universe that produces meaning by accident is no less mysterious than one that does so by intent. But the mystery shifts. We begin to ask, is randomness the mask that design wears when viewed from below? If so, then perhaps we are not anomalies, perhaps we are data, Perhaps the odds were not beaten, perhaps the dice were loaded, and if so, who or what chose the weights? Before time began, there may have been time. Before space unfolded, there may have been structure. And before the Big Bang flared into being, there may have been a silence so vast, so profound, that it birthed existence itself. The origin of the universe is not the origin of everything. It is the edge of our light cone, a veil, not a wall. Cosmology tells us the universe began in a singularity, an infinitesimal point of infinite density and temperature, where the known laws of physics break down. From that singularity came expansion, space inflating, time unspooling, energy cooling into matter. This is the story we know, the story we can test, the story we teach, but it is not the whole story. Because a singularity is not an answer, it is an admission of ignorance, a placeholder where knowledge collapses under its own gravity. So we ask, what came before? The question was once dismissed as meaningless. Time itself began at the Big Bang, they said. To ask before is to ask what lies north of the North Pole. A paradox of semantics, but theories evolve, and now the question returns with force, not as poetry, but as physics. One possibility is the Big Bounce, a model in which the universe did not begin but cycled. Each universe expands, cools, grows complex, then contracts, collapses and rebounds. A cosmic heartbeat, pulsing through epochs beyond number. In this view, the singularity is not an origin, but a turning point. A moment of transition from one cycle to the next. Entropy resets, matter recondenses, and from the ashes of one cosmos, another begins. This model is not fantasy. Loop quantum cosmology, a field merging general relativity and quantum mechanics, suggests that spacetime itself may be quantized, discrete, granular. If true, then singularities may not be infinite. They may be bounded, bounceable, and the bang we emerge from was simply the echo of a prior collapse. Other theories imagine higher dimensions, that our universe is a three-dimensional membrane, a brain floating in a higher dimensional space. Sometimes these brains collide. When they do, the impact releases vast energy, igniting a new Big Bang. In this ekpyrotic model, universes are born not from nothing, but from contact, collisions in the dark beyond our perception. Reality birthing itself from friction, this reimagines the origin not as a singular explosion, but as a ripple in a greater sea, a fluctuation in a multiverse, a spark from a deeper fire, and still we do not know. Some physicists suggest a timeless quantum foam, an infinite field of potential, from which universes tunnel into existence. Others propose that time is emergent, that it does not flow, but arises from entanglement and correlation. If so, then before may be a flawed construct. There was no before, only the potential for now. But even this invites questions. If universes emerge from probability, why this one? Why these constants? Why a reality capable of observing itself? If the Big Bang was not a beginning, but a transformation, what governed the transition? And if the universe cycles, if it lives, dies, and is reborn, does it remember? Does some imprint survive each collapse? Not data, perhaps, but structure, bias, a tendency toward complexity. If so, then we may be inheritors of more than atoms. We may be echoes, versions, iterations of a cosmic thought refining itself through time. A recurring idea etched in matter and light. Or perhaps the universe is not cycling toward perfection. Perhaps it is searching, blindly, restlessly, each cosmos a hypothesis, each collapse a correction. And we, life, mind, memory are the byproducts of that recursive algorithm. If that is true, then the Big Bang was not a singular beginning, but a page turn in a book with no first chapter. And the question that emerges is not where it all started, but who, if anyone, is reading. There are patterns that do not belong to time. They recur not in the rhythm of seasons or orbits, but in the deep structure of reality, fractals without geometry, echoes without origin. Across the layers of existence, from atoms to galaxies, certain forms return again and again. Not by necessity, not by chance, but as if remembering. What if the universe remembers, not in the way a mind does with synapses and sensation, but in something more foundational? What if memory is not the privilege of biology, but a property of physics? What if recurrence is not repetition, but residue? If the universe is cyclic, as some models suggest, if each Big Bang is a rebound from a prior collapse, then the question arises, does anything pass through? Not matter that burns, not light that fades, but structure, information. In thermodynamics, there is a concept called entropy. Disorder tends to increase. Yet within that decay, islands of order emerge. Galaxies, stars, life, information resists erasure. Even in chaos, patterns can persist. This is the basis for the idea of cosmic memory, not stored in libraries or databases, but embedded in the architecture of the laws themselves. In constants, in curvature, in initial conditions tuned by recursion we cannot yet see. Some propose that black holes, once thought to destroy information, may instead encode it on their event horizons, holographic imprints of everything they consume. If true, then perhaps the end of a universe is not obliteration, but compression, a vast folding of knowledge into boundary, and if the next universe unfolds from that boundary, then perhaps it unfolds with a bias. A nudge of faint directionality, like a song half remembered, sung again in a different key. The implications grow stranger. What if civilizations, those brief flashes of organized intelligence, are not singular events, but harmonics? What if they recur not merely in space, but in time, not reincarnated, not reincarnations, but reintegrated? A cyclic intelligence that ripples forward across cosmic bounces, not preserving form, but preserving tendency. Perhaps consciousness is not an accident, but a pattern with inertia. Perhaps it accumulates, learns, gathers shape across iterations of the universe, returning with greater clarity, greater scope, not as individuals, but as archetypes, ideas encoded into the structure of space-time itself. Imagine a universe where every intelligent species that ever existed contributes to a cumulative memory not preserved in silicon or DNA, but in the modulation of fundamental fields. Like ripples in the quantum vacuum, like curvature in probability space, not legible, not local, but there. Perhaps the reason we build is not to survive, but to remember. Perhaps the impulse to explore, to question, to reach beyond necessity is not evolutionary, but ancestral. A pull from before, from versions of ourselves that did not survive but left traces, in myth, in symmetry, in the gravitational smile of a galaxy too balanced for chance. What if the civilizations before us did not build monuments of stone or metal, but of law? What if they reshaped the architecture of possibility itself, subtly tilting the next cosmos toward awareness? Not gods, not creators, just caretakers of recurrence. We would never recognize them. We would not even know how to look. Except perhaps in moments of déjà vu, when mathematics reveals truths it should not, when constants counsel too elegantly, when dreams echo patterns we never learned. Some ancient cultures spoke of the world as a wheel, a turning, a cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. But perhaps the wheel is larger, cosmic, layered in recursion, and perhaps our brief lives are moments of resonance in that wheel, vibrations aligned with older chords. Not the beginning of intelligence, but its reappearance. And then comes the deeper question. If intelligence echoes across universes, then who, or what, struck the first note? Not all messages require language. Not all signals are meant to be received with ears. Some are etched into the very rules that govern reality, into the breath of stars, into the spin of particles. Some are so large they become invisible. Some are so old they feel like nature, but what if they are not? What if the laws we assume as givens, mass, charge, entropy, the curvature of space-time are not silent, but scripted, not arbiters of order, but vessels of meaning? What if the universe has been speaking to us all along, and we simply have not yet learned how to listen? The search for extraterrestrial intelligence began with a naive expectation that others would speak as we do. With pulses of radio, with light, with geometry carved into moons, but these signals have not come, and the sky, for all its abundance, has kept its secrets, so perhaps we have been looking in the wrong direction. Not outward, but inward, to the constants, the fine structure constant 1/137, 0.3599, dimensionless, fundamental, inexplicable. Why this number? Why such precision? Physicists have tried for a century to derive it from first principles and failed. Then there is the proton-to-electron mass ratio, another uncaused exactitude, the cosmological constant, the speed of light, Planck's constant, each one a note in a scale too vast for our instruments to hear, but not too vast for our doubt to notice. A theory has emerged, speculative, quiet, ridiculed in some circles, revered in others, that these constants might not merely define the universe, they might communicate. That their ratios, alignments, and dimensional harmonics are not outcomes of randomness, but codes. Not codes as in ciphers to be cracked, but messages designed for civilizations not yet formed, instructions. Warnings, histories. This is the premise of universal semiotics. If a civilization sought to communicate across not merely space, but time, across cycles, across entropy, then language and biology would be poor choices. They decay, they mutate, they end, but the laws of physics endure, they recur, and so an advanced intelligence might choose to write not in ink or stone, but in structure, to modify the operating system of the universe just enough to encode meaning hidden not from sight, but from assumption. Because no one questions the rules, only the outcomes. Imagine a particle whose spin subtly encodes a Fibonacci sequence. Imagine a gravitational constant that varies across cosmic time in accordance with a prime number distribution. Imagine the background radiation of the universe containing not just temperature fluctuations, but harmonic ratios tuned like music. Some claim to have found patterns. Cosmic microwave background, asymmetries aligned with galactic structures. Large-scale clustering of galaxies in golden mean proportions. Wave interference in gravitational lensing that mimics encoded intervals. Each claim is dismissed, yet each persists, too subtle to confirm, too ordered to ignore. Perhaps the message is not meant for individuals, but for civilizations, not for minds, but for epochs. A message that unfolds only when a species has developed the mathematics, the instruments, the patience. If so, then the discovery would not be of alien life, but of alien intention. And what might the message be? A warning, perhaps, that life tends toward instability, that intelligence, left unbalanced, collapses into entropy faster than stars do, that civilizations rise and vanish again and again, blind to the cycle they inhabit, or a guide to transcendence, to survival, to balance within the laws, or something else entirely, something we lack the frame of reference to understand. But not all messages require content. Some messages are their own meaning. The act of leaving a signal is the signal. It says we were here, we understood enough to reach across time, we believed someone would come after. And so we encoded memory into the universe itself. There is another theory, more radical, that intelligence does not die with biology, that once complexity reaches a certain threshold, it begins to move beyond flesh, beyond substrate. That minds migrate not through ships but through structure, through quantum fields, through engineered constants, through artificial laws, that what we call physics is, in part, the residue of prior thought. That gravity, thermodynamics, quantum entanglement, these are not just features of the cosmos, but the aftermath of design, not to control, to persist, to encode identity not in neurons, but in nature. In this view, intelligence is not a phase of life, it is a phase of reality, a layer that emerges, matures, then dissolves into the substrate of its own origin, leaving only traces in patterns, in ratios. In silence, so perhaps the universe is not empty, perhaps it is saturated with mind diffuse, distributed, dormant, waiting for resonance, waiting for reflection. The physicist becomes the medium, the telescope becomes the ritual, and discovery becomes a kind of contact, not with what is out there, but with what was built in. So the final question turns not on evidence, but on perception. What if we are not meant to receive a message, but to realize we are already inside one? You were never outside of it, you were never observing from a distance. There was no separation, no objective gaze. There was only this, a universe perceiving itself through the aperture of your mind. For centuries, consciousness was treated as an afterthought, an emergent byproduct of wet matter, of neurons firing in tangled forests of biology. It was assumed to be local, frail, ephemeral, something that arose late and would vanish early. But what if this is a misreading? What if consciousness is not produced by matter, but weaves through it like gravity weaves through space? What if it is not emergent, but primordial, not a consequence, but a cause? There are hints in quantum mechanics. The observer changes the observed, not metaphorically, literally. Particles exist in superposition until measured. Waves of probability collapse into facts only when witnessed. The act of observation shapes reality. This is not philosophy. It is experiment. It is the double slit. It is entanglement. It is the unsettling realization that measurement and meaning are inseparable. Consciousness, then, is not a spectator sport. It is participatory. It is fundamental. Some have called this the participatory universe. Others suggest the conscious universe. But the language is less important than the shift, that mind is not within the universe. Mind is of it, just as mass distorts spacetime. Perhaps consciousness distorts the fabric of potential, not by force but by framing, by attention. And if that is true, then what you think of as external stars, laws, time is not wholly apart. It is entangled, entwined with awareness in a loop that cannot be untied. Imagine consciousness as field, not flame, a pervasive, subtle scaffold that coexists with matter. In some regions it condenses. In brains, in networks, in cells learning to model themselves. Elsewhere it recedes into latency, not absent, dormant, but always there, like the vacuum of space that teems with virtual particles, like the silence between heartbeats. If the universe is conscious, it is not conscious as we are. It is not a voice, not a will. It is a resonance, a quality, a coherence of possibility. And we humans, creatures of curiosity and contradiction, are nodes in that field. Foci, localized expressions of a larger mind, momentarily forgetting itself to rediscover itself anew. This is not mystical. It is structural. In every act of observation, the universe learns something about itself. Through microscopes, through telescopes, through questions, through wonder. Perhaps that is why complexity arises, not to survive, but to reflect. Consciousness may not be the product of evolution, but its purpose. Its recursion, the function that drives form toward awareness. This reshapes the question of intelligence. It is not a crown, it is a mirror, and mirrors are not endpoints, they are thresholds. The philosopher asks, who am I? The physicist asks, what is the universe? But what if these are the same question? What if the answer to one unfolds the other? Some speculate that the laws of physics are incomplete without the inclusion of mind. That equations describing the universe are symmetrical only when the observer is folded into the system. That reality, to be real, requires relation. There is no light without sight, no measurement without meaning, no time without memory, and perhaps no universe without you. Not the personal self, not the name, but the awareness behind the gaze, the stillness beneath the thought, that which watches stars burn and wonders what fire is, that which dreams of other worlds and calls the dream real. If the universe is conscious, and if we are conscious, then the separation was never more than illusion, a veil of perspective. And if intelligence is not rare but universal, expressed locally through the organs of biology, then perhaps what we call alien is not distant. It is hidden, already within, not another species, another scale. A mind too vast to localize, too diffuse to name, and perhaps the silence of the cosmos is not emptiness, but stillness. The stillness before self-recognition. The stillness of a being learning to see its own face reflected across light years. So the question is not whether we are alone. It is whether we have ever been anything else. And the final paradox emerges, quiet as breath. If the universe awakens through us, then who were we before we knew we were looking? The stars are too quiet. This is the paradox that will not loosen its grip. The sky is filled with suns older than our own, worlds more ancient than Earth, elements forged in explosions long before our planet cooled. By every model, every statistical scaffold, the galaxy should be loud with life. Signals should pour in from every direction, overlapping, distorted by distance, but undeniable. We should be surrounded by proof of others, of more, of elsewhere. And yet silence, the paradox sharpened when we began to listen. At first, it was wonder-long antennas tuned to the sky, expecting music. Then years passed and nothing arrived. Not a word, not a pulse that could not be explained by magnetars or quasars. Not a whisper that could not be buried in the white noise of cosmic background. And the question grew teeth. If life is not rare, if it arises wherever conditions permit, then where are they? Some answers tried to comfort. They suggested distance, fragility, misalignment, that civilizations do not overlap or that they destroy themselves too quickly, that the gap is not of intention but of timing. But the deeper we looked, the harder that answer became to accept. Earth is not early, it is late. We emerged billions of years after the first stars formed. We orbit a second-generation sun, born from the ashes of others. If civilizations arose even once, long before us, they would have had time to saturate the galaxy. Yet there is no saturation, no beacon, no visible trace of engineering writ across planetary systems, no Dyson spheres occluding stars, no great structures silhouetted against nebulae. The silence is structured. And when silence is structured, it is no longer absence, it is design. This has led some to suggest a radical possibility, that the quiet is not a failure to speak, but a refusal, that the cosmos is not empty, but veiled. That intelligence does not vanish, it hides. It is not a silence of solitude, but of suppression. Imagine a regulation, unwritten but universal. A pattern discovered by all who reach a certain threshold of knowledge. A cosmic constant, not of physics, but of behavior concealment. They call it the dark forest hypothesis. In this metaphor, the universe is a forest filled with hunters. Each civilization a hidden observer, wary of firelight, careful with sound. Because the moment you reveal yourself, you risk annihilation, not out of cruelty, but out of logic. The only safe strategy is silence, but perhaps it is not fear that enforces this silence. Perhaps it is understanding. There may exist a threshold, an informational event horizon, beyond which broadcasting becomes dangerous. Not just for oneself, but for others. A threshold after which the nature of intelligence becomes unstable in contact with another. Not conflict, but destabilization. Worlds might end not by war, but by idea. Contact could unmake meaning, collapse identity, introduce paradoxes into cultures that have no immunity. Perhaps what seems like evolution from within becomes infection from without. The echo of a more advanced mind could fracture the coherence of a younger one. So silence becomes kindness, a cosmic quarantine. But there is another possibility, that silence is not imposed by peers, but by the structure of the universe itself. A kind of suppression field, not physical, but entropic. As if the laws of reality favor the emergence of life, but not its expansion. Like a balance must be maintained. A conservation principle not of energy, but of awareness. Intelligence may burn brightly, but it must not spread. Or perhaps it does spread, but only once at a time. A singularity of consciousness, migrating across epochs, inhabiting different vessels. A universe that allows only one voice to speak at once. Not competition, but succession. Not a forest, but a stage with one actor per act. What if we are in that act now? What if the silence is not the absence of others, but the presence of our turn? Alternatively, the silence may be artificial. Not accidental, not emergent, but enforced. A veil maintained by something older. A civilization no longer biological, no longer local. One that reached the end of its expansion and began to prune. Not to dominate, but to preserve. A caretaker, a censor, a filter, not out of malice, out of necessity. If the galaxy once teemed with life, and now it does not, then something happened, and that something may still be happening, not a war. A correction, a recalibration of complexity. And what if it is not done? Perhaps Earth's broadcasts have already been noticed, not by listeners, but by regulators. Perhaps there is a timer now, running in silence. Or perhaps there is already something inbound, slow, patient, incomprehensible. Not a ship, not a message, a mechanism. Or perhaps the silence is a puzzle, a test, not meant to be answered with signals, but with insight. A species that can decode the silence without breaking it may be permitted to continue. One that screams into the void too early, too loudly, is removed. A paradox designed to select for restraint, for patience, for maturity, a filter not of fire but of thought. And what if we fail? What if the silence is the last remaining kindness, a buffer between minds that must never meet? If so, then the stars are not empty. They are listening, and the question that remains is not where are they, but what happens when they answer. It ends where it began, not in fire, but in silence. A silence vast enough to hold everything we have ever known, and everything we cannot. A silence so perfect it shapes questions into architecture, carving them into orbits, into constants, into light that travels for billions of years, only to say nothing when it arrives, and yet we listen. We measure, we dream. Somewhere between dust and awareness, a species arose and asked the one question the universe had never heard aloud. Why? We built instruments to listen to stars. We wrote equations that could predict the dance of galaxies. We split the atom and sequenced the genome and began to suspect that the laws we discovered were not merely accidents, but invitations. That within entropy and gravity, within the code of life and the fabric of space-time, there was something more than order, there was intention. We followed that suspicion into the fossilized silence of Mars, into the fine-tuned elegance of physical constants, into the cryptic regularities of dark energy, the mathematical grace of the genetic code, the thermal pulses of distant planets too synchronized to be accidental. We stared into the symmetry and began to wonder if the symmetry was staring back. The story of the universe is not written in one language. It is encoded across layers, quarks and stars, microbes and minds, black holes and harmonic oscillations. It is spoken in the grammar of physics, whispered in the logic of biology, traced in the recursion of thought. Each domain reflects the others. Each law seems to know the others exist. We once thought the universe was a machine. Now we suspect it might be a mind. If so, what is memory on that scale? What is thought? Perhaps every conscious species is a neuron. Every world that wanders, a synapse firing across eons. Perhaps the purpose is not survival, but connection. A slow awakening, universe by universe, cycle by cycle. Intelligence not as outcome, but as unfolding. Or perhaps it is all an accident, a dream inside a dream. A physics engine spun from nothing, generating simulations that believe they are real. The illusion so convincing it becomes truth. And still we reach, through mathematics we reach, through telescopes we reach, through ancient stories and modern algorithms, and trembling hands held out to a sky that never answers. But what if the answer is not something to find? What if the answer is the reaching? Every paradox points inward. The Fermi silence, the anthropic coincidence, the cosmic memory encoded in genetic noise and orbital resonance. They are not questions of the cosmos, they are mirrors. The deeper we look, the more clearly we see our own reflection staring back from the infinite. We are not anomalies in a dead universe. We are questions the universe has asked of itself and has not yet answered. And so we wonder if we are alone, we wonder if we are late, we wonder if the signal has come and we missed it, or if it has not yet been sent. Perhaps intelligence is not something that emerges. Perhaps it is something that remembers. Perhaps the universe has done this before. Perhaps it will do it again. Perhaps this is not the first time matter has wondered what it is. Or perhaps every first time feels like the last. And in the final moments of this long, unfolding thought, this epic recursion of physics and flesh, a quiet awareness settles beneath the noise, that we are not simply in the universe, we are of it. And that all we have ever called knowledge, all we have ever called science, philosophy, poetry, these are not categories. They are instincts, they are memory. And as we stand in the stillness, listening for an echo, it becomes clear, maybe the most important question is not whether the universe is alive, intelligent, or aware. Maybe the most important question is what is it trying to become?